As World War I rages, an invisible threat emerges. On March 11, 1918, the influenza pandemic's first case is documented. A U.S. Army private reports to the camp hospital at Fort Riley, Kansas before breakfast. He complains of a fever, a sore throat, and a headache. 1 minute later, another soldier shows up. By noon, there are over 100 cases. A week later, 500. That spring, 48 soldiers die of the flu at Fort Riley. The world is in the throes of World War I. Over 1 million Americans cross the Atlantic for the war. Some of those doughboys come from Kansas, of course, kickstarting a worldwide pandemic. Cases stretch as far as the remote reaches of Greenland and the Pacific Islands. About 1/3 of the world's population is infected, and around 10% of those infected die. Unlike other types of influenza, which are most dangerous for the old and the frail, this strain is as likely to kill a 20-year-old as an 80-year-old. An estimated 675,000 Americans die of influenza. The worldwide death toll is 50 million. Stay tuned as I answer some questions about the 1918 influenza pandemic. First off, why is it so often referred to as the Spanish flu? Additionally, did anyone famous die from the 1918 flu? And finally, how did people try to combat the disease back in 1918? Also, don't forget to check out Today in History in my Teachers Pay Teachers store. There's a link in the description. Although H1N1 influenza is informally known as the Spanish flu, the disease likely does not begin in Spain. So why then is it called the Spanish flu? Well, because Spain is neutral in World War I, its media covers the pandemic in depth, publishing detailed accounts of its effects, including the fact that Spanish King Alfonso XIII has his own battle with the disease. The nations at war, on the other hand, censor influenza news to try to keep up morale and to avoid giving any strategic aid to the enemy. Therefore, people in the warring nations mainly get their comprehensive news about the pandemic from Spanish media, and naturally assume, therefore, that Spain is the pandemic's ground zero. Ironically, the Spanish call the disease the French flu, believing it had spread to them from France. And actually, it probably did. Anyway, scientists are still unsure of the exact origin of the H1N1 strain of influenza, but many believe it started on a Kansas farm in January 1918 when a bird flu and a human flu combined in a pig, creating a whole new type of influenza. Researchers still don't know why this particular strain of influenza was so deadly or why it killed so many people who were in the prime of life. World War I, of course, has a huge impact on the pandemic. American men gather to register for the draft, and these American doughboys travel back and forth across the Atlantic. Soldiers fighting in the trenches or in close quarters, and they spread the disease. Factories at home increase production, which causes people to work long hours side by side. There's just a lot of opportunity for infection. Additionally, there are parades and there are other patriotic gatherings to bring people together to support the war effort. And so you have all these things going on to get people in close quarters. There are also many prominent victims of the influenza pandemic, which runs from about 1918 to 1920. The eldest son of Saudi Arabia's first king dies of the flu at age 18 or 19. He would have most likely become the king of Saudi Arabia someday. Swedish Prince Eric, who's the youngest son of King Gustav V, he dies at age 29 in Stockholm. Brazil's president-elect dies before he can take office in 1919 from the flu. Louis Botha, the first prime minister of the Union of South Africa, he dies while in office from the flu. Former President Donald Trump's grandfather Friedrich Trump, dies from the flu in New York City in 1918 at age 49. U.S. Brigadier General Charles Doyen dies of influenza in 1918 at age 59, while he is the commander of the Marine Corps training camp and the Marine barracks at Quantico, Virginia. Rose Cleveland, who is the sister of former U.S. President Grover Cleveland, dies in 1918 from the flu. She had actually served as First Lady in the 1880s during the first years of her brother's first term as president. This is, of course, before his White House marriage. Yes, Grover Cleveland is the only bachelor ever elected president and the second of 3 presidents to marry while in office. U.S. President Woodrow Wilson collapses from the flu in Paris while negotiating the Versailles Treaty at the end of World War I in 1919. It takes a major toll on him and may have affected negotiations on his 14 points. He recovers, but suffers a stroke later that year, perhaps triggered by his bout with influenza. His health continues to decline, and he dies in 1924 at age 67. Lunsford Richardson, the founder of Vic Chemical Company and the developer of Vicks VapoRub, dies of influenza in 1919. Vicks VapoRub came out in the early 1900s, and I'm assuming people tried to use that to help combat the flu, interestingly enough. Phoebe Hearst, who is the mother of newspaper magnate William Randolph Hearst, she dies of the flu in California in 1919 at age 76. Both Dodge brothers, these are the founders of the Dodge Automobile Company. They die in 1920, one in January and the other in December, and they're just 55 and 52 years old. Bill Yawkey, the owner of the Detroit Tigers, he dies in 1919 of influenza at just age 43. Public health officials are mostly powerless against this pandemic. Hospitals are overwhelmed with patients. Many U.S. cities institute mask mandates. Many close schools and many outlaw public gatherings to try to combat the disease. New York City keeps its schools open, believing the schools provide better health conditions than the crowded and unsanitary tenements in the slums. Windows, though, are kept open for ventilation, often even in colder months. Many children across the country note how strange it is when they go back to school because so many of their classmates have died. Some people are fined or even imprisoned for not following the protocols. Some people protest against the public health efforts as well. The Anti-Mask League forms in San Francisco, viewing mask mandates as an unconstitutional limit of individual liberty. Most people, however, comply with the ordinances. The shutdowns have mixed results. There are some violent incidents as well. A health inspector in San Francisco shoots a man who refuses to wear a mask. There's a desperate man in Chicago who shouts, "I'll cure them my own way," and then he cuts the throats of his wife and his 4 children. Researchers try to develop a vaccine, but they unfortunately are targeting the wrong pathogen. They believe that influenza is caused by bacteria rather than a virus. This is not their fault. Viruses are too small to be seen with the microscopes of the day. The electron microscope isn't invented until 1931, enabling viruses to be discovered in 1935, which is, of course, 17 years too late. The influenza pandemic's deadly second wave hits in the fall of 1918. October 1918, remember that month. It is the deadliest month in U.S. history, with 195,000 deaths in that one single month. For comparison, January 2021 is the deadliest month from COVID-19 in the U.S., and it has half as many deaths. Keep in mind, the U.S. population was only 103 million in 2018. That's less than a third of 2021's population. Well, if you like what you've seen here today, please make sure to like and subscribe. And there are other great Mr. Lewis videos you can watch. There's one that you can watch right here, and there's another one that you can watch right here. Thanks again.